Hi, everybody. Mr. Edelman here with another remote learning session for all of you and a new headline of the day for our conversation regarding all things current events, government, and economics related. So, today we're going to look at an article from the New York Times called Supreme Court Blocks Extended Voting in Wisconsin. Let me read just a little bit of the subtext. It says, the 5-4 ruling was the court's first in a dispute arising from the coronavirus pandemic, and it suggests it may struggle to maintain an image of nonpartisanship as an election disputes arise this year. Nonpartisanship, partisan means favoring one political party. So nonpartisan or nonpartisanship is the opposite. So it's not taking sides between Democrats and Republicans, which is interesting because, well, again, it says may struggle to maintain. So if you read this headline closely, it's leading you to believe that the Supreme Court might actually be partisan and take sides and favor Democrats versus Republicans. And that's the big theme that we're going to talk about today, is can you separate politics from government? Do people make decisions separate from their own political beliefs or from the politics that put them into power in the first place? So let me read a little bit more, and then we'll talk about how this connects to all things U.S. government related, and also use this as an opportunity to review some major concepts that will also be connected to the AP exam if you plan to take the AP exam as well. Okay, so it says, the Supreme Court on Monday issued its first ruling in the case arising from the coronavirus pandemic, refusing to extend the deadline for absentee voting in Tuesday's election in Wisconsin by 6 days. So that's today. Today is the Wisconsin primary date. And based upon this ruling, Wisconsin has to maintain the primary on the state in person, even though that we have a system of social distancing and trying to ensure the public safety and public health. People have the opportunity to vote in public today, in person, in Wisconsin, for a Democratic nominee. And also, if you had an absentee ballot, so you were planning on voting at home through the mail, those absentee ballots are due the day that they were initially due, and they can't be sent in later. So if today was the last day for absentee ballots, there's no extension. The Supreme Court decided there can't be an extension for that, because the Supreme Court vote was 5-4, with the court's more conservative members in the majority. The split, with all the justices appointed by Republicans, endorsing the result sought by the Republicans and all the Democrat appointees in the dissent. So let's talk about, again, use this as a launch pad to talk about the makeup of the Supreme Court and what effects that might have in terms of this decision. All right, there's 9 members on the Supreme Court. That's intentional, so there can't be a split decision. Again, if all 9 justices are able and present to vote, then again, there can't be a tie. There has to be a winning decision. And based upon this Supreme Court decision, it was the conservative bloc that has the most members that were in the majority. Okay. So all of the individuals down here on the bottom, they were appointed by Republican presidents. Again, to become a Supreme Court justice, you need to be appointed by the president, and then you need to be confirmed in the Senate. And that only happens, again, if somebody retires or God retires them and they die in office. And so Trump has been lucky to be able to appoint 2 justices to the Supreme Court. First, Neil Gorsuch. He was appointed first. And then later on in Trump's presidency, most recently, Brett Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh, we talked about, and was a controversial pick because he was accused of sexual misconduct, and there were these long hearings in the Senate, and then ultimately the Senate confirmed him. Why? Not surprising. The Senate is controlled by Republicans. They had the majority of the votes, right? So again, another way that you can't separate politics from government. There was the Republicans had the most votes in confirming Kavanaugh. He got appointed, just like Trump, again, was when he was impeached. he was tried in the Senate. Again, it was the House that was the majority Democrats that decided to impeach him and put him on trial. Then the Senate, the trial happened in the Senate. That was majority Republicans, and they confirmed him. So you can't separate politics from government in that situation as well. The individuals up here, including the 3 women that are on the court, were appointed during Democratic presidencies. Justice Sonia Sotomayor was appointed under the Obama administration. She's a New Yorker. She's from the Bronx, and she is part of the liberal bloc. Okay. Some other things to talk about. So first off, why is Wisconsin so important? Why does the Supreme Court, or why does the Republican Party care so much about the election in Wisconsin? Because again, this is a primary. This is to determine who the Democratic nominee is going to be, which we feel confident that it's pretty much going to be Joe Biden at this point. So why do they care? Well, it has a lot to do with precedent in terms of how this decision could possibly impact future decisions. And the most important decision would be who becomes the president, which again should be decided in November. But if courts make decisions now, like you can change the voting rules, then perhaps when it comes November, if the election needs to be postponed or alternatives need to be made, like let's allow people to vote from their homes, right? Then the decisions that are made now will affect those decisions. And then again, both political parties want to ensure that their candidate is going to win the presidency, which is really, really important. So Republicans are looking at this and making sure that the rules are still going to be in favor, that will hopefully allow their Republican candidate, Donald Trump, to win re-election. And Democrats, they want to make sure that perhaps the rules should change a bit. And if they're more flexible, it might benefit their candidate as well. So both political parties are concerned, especially when it comes to Wisconsin. Why? Wisconsin is a purple or swing state, meaning sometimes the majority of the voters vote Republican, sometimes the majority of the voters vote Democrat. So if you look here in 2012, when Obama was running for re-election, he won. He got the majority of the votes. Then 4 years later, when Trump ran against Hillary, Trump got the majority of the votes, just by a little bit, right? It was close. But that's why it's a swing state. So states like Wisconsin that are swing states, sometimes they vote Democrat, sometimes they vote Republican, are really, really important because even though Trump won by just a little bit in 2016, he won all the states' electoral votes because, again, at the presidential level, elections take place on a winner-take-all basis in the vast majority of states. Okay. So here we are, right? We've been looking at this. Our primary election started off in Iowa with the Iowa caucuses. Moving down here, we're at April 7th, where Wisconsinites are supposed to go to the polls. And again, this is also important for the Democrats because it seems like if Joe Biden wins in Wisconsin, perhaps this would be the time that Bernie Sanders drops out. Who knows? But yeah, this is the date that Wisconsinites are supposed to go to the polls. So let's look at some statistics regarding voting and why the Republicans feel so strongly about not extending or making accommodations for people to vote, and why this connects to politics being involved in government. So let's look at some voter participation rates. So this is talking to you about voter participation based upon certain demographics, in this case, skin color or ethnicity. All right. Typically for a presidential election, voter turnout is between 40 and around 60%. Whites vote more than minorities. Okay. So you can see most recently, right, the number of whites that turn out and go to the polls is more than the number of blacks, which is more than the number of Hispanics, which is more than the number of Asians. So you can think about basically why that might be. You might be able to connect it to socioeconomic arguments. If minorities need to work longer, perhaps they're less likely to be able to go to the polls. There's many ways that you could perceive perhaps why this is the case, but ultimately it's important that whites vote more than minorities. Why? Well, let's look at who they vote for. So if we're looking at based upon demographics, are they more likely to support a Democrat or Republican candidate? You could see that in this case, whites are more likely to vote Republican than to vote Democratic, versus blacks and Hispanics are much more likely to vote Democratic than Republican, right? So if you're a Republican or you support the Republican Party, you want to ensure that whites are going to the polls in the same numbers or higher numbers, and perhaps it would be to your self-interest to ensure that the system stays the same, that perhaps blacks and Hispanics are voting in the same way and they're not voting in larger numbers, right? If you want your candidate to continue to win. Let's talk about age. So this purple up here is for the oldest Americans and that are 60 above, and you can see that older Americans vote more than younger Americans, being 18 to 29 are the ones that come out and vote the least. Now, similarly, you can see that older Americans are more likely to vote Republican than younger Americans, right? So if you want to make sure that a Republican candidate is reelected, you want this to stay the same, right? And if you want the Democratic candidate to win, you want to make it easier and more likely for young people to vote, and you also want to make it more likely for minorities to vote as well, right? So if you can make it easier and you can increase voter participation by minorities and by young people, you are more likely to get a Democratic candidate to win, okay? And so this is, again, a great example of that you can't separate politics from government in terms of the systems that we use to elect representatives for our government. So it'd be very interesting to see again what turns out to be the results of the primary, right? What is going to be the voter turnout, that the number of people that vote in person. It'd be interesting to also see the number of people that vote via absentee ballot. And it'd be, again, interesting to think about how this specific case and the decision that was made by the Supreme Court, how similar decisions and similar actions that the Supreme Court takes in regards to our electoral system plays out as we approach the general election. So again, New York now is at the bottom of the list to vote in the primary, which won't necessarily be relevant if Bernie Sanders does drop out before that. And then again, the Democratic convention was postponed. It was initially supposed to be in mid-July. That was postponed until August. And again, it'd be interesting to see how all this accumulates into the results when we approach the presidential election in November. So please stay happy to the best of your abilities, stay healthy, let's continue learning together, and I hope to see you all again soon. I'm curious to hear what your reactions, comments, and questions are to this screencast. And it looks like I'm having a little digital error over here, so hopefully this will save. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.